It is 22 and a bit to 10 here on RNZ National, and we call that approximate time on Wednesday's Midweek Mediawatch o'clock. I'm joined now from Wellington by Colin Peacock. Hello, Colin.
G'day, Emil. Yeah, that's Colin Peacock with just one E.
With just one E.
You've given me an extra one on the website tonight, but I like it. Don't change it. You put an E
did
on
we
the
really?
end. Yeah, I like it.
Sorry, Colin.
No, I'm going to change it. Because when people are called Brooke and it's just with the K, it looks a bit harsh. With Brooke with the E. I feel swisher. And
the extra vowel.
Yeah.
Man of just of not that many vowels. All right. It's been a big day for media news in New Zealand. Let's jump straight in. The Herald, the New Zealand Herald, has confirmed the loss of about 30 journalist jobs, including, I'd note here, Colin, some really big names. Yes,
that's true. Before that, we should say this news was not a surprise because this had been announced in January. Great start to the year for media under pressure. Then they were talking about proposing 38 roles to be cut. So there have been some changes in that process of consultation and so on. Some big names have taken what we're told is voluntary redundancy, but the ones that have been reported: political editor Claire Trevett, Deputy Business Editor Grant Bradley, who's been with the Herald a very long time. Senior sports reporter Chris Ratchew, likewise, with his contrarian columns and ability to, create engagement.
Right, people are. Yeah.
Jamie Morton, really, really good, multi-award-winning science reporter. Nicholas Jones, not the highest profile person, but he's done a lot of work. He's a senior investigative journalist. And there are others. So these are, as you discussed with Hayden last week, or in fact, the first time this came up, so probably early February, these are people who've been crucial in being able to give the content that the Herald put behind the paywall in that terribly awkward transition of everything being online for free, not giving it away for free, creating premium content, getting tens of thousands or six-figure number of subscribers, and way beyond that. Those people have been really important, and they will certainly be missed because they do underpin that premium content offering that's holding up the income from subscriptions.
Yeah, and produce, of course, excellent work regularly. So, what the million-dollar question, I guess, Colin, why is the Herald letting them go?
Well, like all media companies, they're under pressure. But NZME is a bit different now, and what used to be a really standard sort of thing, really a media company with owners or shareholders or whatever in the commercial environment. But they're the only one, I think, that's listed on the stock exchange now. Others, like, say, the Otago Daily Times, have the Smith family. Stuff is owned now, bought out by its own boss, Sinead Boucher, so different situations. So the Herald's problem, or NZME's problem, is that their profits are... It's still profitable. It still turns a profit for sure. But the forecasts are that the profit will be declining. It will be less and less each year. The shareholders that are still prepared to be in it kind of know that that's the case. So they want cuts to be made, costs to be cut. And the company does, I guess, need to be able to be in a position to pay dividends to retain these investors. That's essential to them. So the tricky bit is you cut the costs, you're cutting the content, but that is what people are investing in. It is, as we were just saying, what creates the product that gives the company at least part of its value. So, they've got other parts, the real estate thing called One Roof, that does a lot of business, has advertising and so on. These are important to the company too, but that's the difficult equation. They've got to keep their investors, and they have to pay them dividends.
Yeah, and the word on the street is that NZME is preparing for a pretty hard pivot into video, right? The video is going to go front and centre.
Yeah, well, you talked about that with Hayden. In fact, Hayden revealed it
Indeed
on Mediawatch last week because a document had made its way to us. So that was confirmed today. The chief executive, Michael Boggs, saying there is potential to grow audiences and revenue, but it's a tough one. So they're on the working title Herald Now, as Hayden talked to you about it last week. But I suppose there's a caveat on this slightly in that it's conceivable that this document that we have is no longer the exact plan. But what it is, in a minute or less, a free ad-supported channel, so like watching a television channel, but streaming online with ads dropped in, you can't go back and forwards. The Herald Now document says a clear gap in the market for this premium, always-on video content. They might be right in the sense that, other news bulletins that were there, like the TV3 breakfast show that's up against the TVNZ breakfast show that's still there. There's no midday news anymore or afternoon news bulletins, so maybe streaming news-based video that's live would get an audience. But, when you go back a bit, both NZME and Stuff, the major publishers, had big video platforms they invested in. Watch Me was called NZME's one. They started that in 2015, shut it down. That was in the first so-called pivot to video.
When Facebook, it was kind of engineered by Facebook, right?
Yeah, and the stats ended up being, not quite what Facebook was saying they were. And also just the fact that the platforms ended up being so good at attracting the advertising and monetizing it themselves. Stuff, do you remember, had a thing called Play Stuff with an app and smart TVs? Like a lot of content from outside providers that kind of didn't take off. RNZ's venture into Checkpoint, hasn't lasted quite a while, but they've shut it down now without exactly howls of protest. So difficult, but Stuff is now, of course, producing 3 News for Warner Brothers Discovery, the 3 channel after the closure of News Hub. So maybe NZME's looking at that and thinking, they need to be in on this capacity, this capability as well.
And they might also say, I suppose, the decision makers at NZME, downgraded their earnings guidance. The financial problems of media companies are well documented, and we have to try something.
Absolutely, yeah. They've got it. And you'd think, like, for example, at a much smaller scale, they tried to launch ZB Plus, sort of monetize subscription with a bit of right-leaning comment. That didn't work, but, where's the harm, I guess, for them? I think they'd say if that was their strategy, you try things, sometimes they don't work, move on to the next thing. They've invested in TV-capable people at the company, as Hayden was talking about last time with you, Michael Morrow, Ryan Bridge, people like that, who feature fairly prominently in this document and will certainly be a part of this streaming service if it does eventuate sometime in the first half of this year, according to the document. So we'll see. So, yeah, they certainly want to be in on that game and think that video is the way to go. And if they've got the skills, they're going to use them. They've got the studios there too at the Herald and at News Talk ZB, and they have broadcast election specials and things like that have been, perfectly watchable and competent. So, they're going to expand on that for sure.
I guess the balance that you have to strike in a situation like this is ensuring that with your pivot into, maybe focusing more strongly on a different medium, you don't hurt the reputation of the product that has particularly brought subscribers to you, and that will be the fear here, that many of these journalists who are, who have excellent reputations and who, as you mentioned before, doubtlessly would have brought people on board in terms of subscribing, you don't want people to then be turned off by the fact that they're no longer there.
No, absolutely. And when you take someone like Jamie Morton, in his science writing, that would absolutely be something that some subscribers would have been prepared to pay for. So they're restructuring the way they do news with the so-called desk system. So they're going to have topics and even regions that will have editors. They're going to do it that way. So it's quite centralised. That could still be capable of putting out, quite a lot of the kind of content people want. And as has been said right at the start, part of this is we're not going to try and do so many stories. We're going to focus more on the ones that our analysis tells us people really do want and engage with, and possibly the ones they subscribe for. So they're certainly turning their focus on, but the video thing still feels to me like a gamble. And I know, talking to people at the company, they still feel like they have not been fully appraised of what the strategy or the targets really are. So it's a bold move.
Hi, Emil Brenda writes, is NZME New Zealand owned? Well, it's a publicly listed company, isn't it?
Yeah, it's got owners, shareholders here, small investors, big ones, but it's got offshore owners as well, Australian companies, a couple of North America as well. So it certainly has a range of owners who will want to return from it for sure.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about an interesting event in Wellington today. This is the Vision for Wellington group, which Mediawatch has covered in some depth. They held their first meeting in Wellington tonight with the backing of Stuff in more ways than one, Cole.
Yeah, so that was why it was newsworthy in the first instance. This group of prominent people in business and public life in Wellington announced they weren't happy with the direction of the capital, wanted to do something about it, and they formed this group. One of its members was Stuff's owner, Sinead Boucher, and subsequently that was revealed by the Post itself, which is quite trenchant. And they also revealed after that, with Official Information Act requests, that some of the members of the group had been giving a heads up about it to National Party, government ministers, such as Chris Bishop, the Prime Minister himself, Simeon Brown, and so on. So that led people to think, hang on, is this really a right-leaning or even National Party government-aligned effort is it against the city council and so on. So they held this this first meeting. They say, look, it's not that. We're just trying to get a positive vision for a city that's in trouble, needs fresh ideas. It's not about trying to unseat anyone. But today, their first public meeting, Patrick Gower was the host of it, and he's been hired by Stuff to be a kind of positive news guy. Mm-hmm. So he hosted this thing. It was at the Michael Fowler Centre, live streamed on Stuff, and attracted, according to Patrick Gower, he said there were around about 1,000 people there, so that's not a bad crowd.
I see James Cameron was there.
Yes, yes, and he was the subject of the Titanic boost for new capital Ginger Group, stuff like that. He was actually quite odd. And so, I mean, what this was, and I should say, it wasn't this vision for Wellington Group standing up, so we need change, grab your pitchforks, let's go to the city council. It was not that. It was actually quite laid back. It was about hearing people's concerns, what they think could be done with the capital. That was the idea. And they had an expert panel, or an invited panel, and James Cameron was one. But I mean, the thing is, about most of the first hour of this was spent with all of them. James Cameron, there was a Pickpock gaming company entrepreneur, Emma Proctor, was there, and Stuart Niven, who's an urban designer of some years, who'd worked on Wellington's waterfront years ago and had worked in other cities on urban design as well, so he had quite a bit to say. But for the first hour, they just talked about their own businesses, their own things, and Emma Proctor talked an awful lot about different games that I think were a bit of a mystery to people in the gaming industry, in the crowd, and about the gaming industry in general. It didn't appear to be going anywhere at all. And James Cameron said, you're probably here because you're angry, he said to the crowd, but don't be. Wellington's intimate, it's great. And I could say, he's trying to build up a bit of a vibe here of engagement. But then he sort of weirdly threw in this thing about the design of the bike lanes, and then sat back and said, I've just thrown a bit of meat in front of the junkyard dog there, and oh boy. And it was quite odd. And
that was an interesting James Cameron impression, Colin.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't quite realise I was doing that. But he actually did. I mean, he was a bit like that. And later, a question. So one good thing about this is that although I feel that honestly there wasn't much structure to it, and at times you wondered about the value of what the panellists were actually bringing to it, there were questions from the people had submitted in advance, and Patrick Gower sort of sifted through those and put some of the very good ones to the audience. But one was people saying, look, I come into the CBD, I feel like a bit threatened. It's dark, there's sketchy people around, and this is something people do say. I don't feel like it's welcoming. And James Cameron just sort of said, I don't know what you're talking about. When I come, I don't feel that. And he said, but parking's a nightmare. And he got this big round of applause. Parking a car at streets a nightmare, and it's like there's nowhere to park a car. And you just think, like, what? The capital has lots of these, the worst buildings in the city are these multi-storey car parks. There's plenty of them. They're generally empty because they're really expensive, and people don't want to pay. And what he's really talking about is street-side parking. But, he also talked about all sorts of problems. He said there's I've lived in Malibu and LA and whatever, and said many worse things than face Wellington there. So I don't know. The whole thing felt terribly unfocused to me, although it's the first one. The test will be, I guess, when they have the next one. Will they get hundreds or towards 1,000 people, as Patrick Gower was saying there? And, will they start getting genuine ideas and things, because if I was to try and write, 5 takeaways from this 2-hour event, I don't know if I'd get to 5.
Well, I mean, you've stuck your pitchfork into James Cameron there, Cole. If James Cameron had the opportunity to reply, he might say this Colin Peacock fellow, he's the thing about this guy is he's too negative. He's focusing so much on the negative here, just like the media, and that's not what Wellington needs. Wellington needs ideas. It needs energy. It needs vision. Yeah. Vision for Wellington.
Yeah, well, they talked about that, like Emma Proctor talked about vibe. He said, we've got a different vibe. We're not Wellington. We're not Auckland. We're different. But there's an awful lot of talk that it felt like the city was, it was this kind of waterfront thing with a few suburbs tacked on and industries, and it didn't feel like they were saying anything that would have meant an awful lot to people who live in, outer suburbs, or, it felt like it lacked structure. But that thing of positivity was interesting, and there was an interesting comment in advance of this from the Herald's Wellington reporter Georgina Campbell. She has a weekly column called Capital Letter, and she said it's quite odd, this attempt to generate positivity. She had the kind of a battle brewing between this group. The former mayor, Justin Lester, also has a Wellington Alive thing. And he says, I get a bit fed up with being told that the media is facilitating this negativity. And she had this funny story about Justin Lester's Wellington Alive Facebook page actually having a picture she said was lifted from one of her stories, which was about a couple launching a pub in difficult circumstances in Cuba Street, and it was that it in itself was an example of her being positive and covering a positive story. It had been lifted by him for this page, where one of his things was to criticise the likes of the mainstream media for focusing too much on the negative and getting in the way of revitalisation. So that was pretty funny. It's actually a pretty good article by Georgina. A curious positivity battle brewing in the capital is the title. Yeah, look for it online. It's good.
I mean, George Campbell is a friend of mine. I went to journalism school with her, but so I am probably a bit biased here, but I thought it was excellent and really perceptive. And this wider issue is something that you do come up against in discussions with people about the media, right? This idea that the media is just relentlessly negative, and perhaps that this is turning people off the media. When you have conversations like that, what do you say?
Well, a bit like I could lean back on what Georgina wrote to say the idea that media should operate like a marketing tool is wrong. We've got to be driven by objectivity and fairness. And, she also makes the point, when the number of journalists is thin on the ground, it's more important than ever that they do this because, by contrast, the voices of boosterism, public relations and so on are outnumbering them. And, it was funny listening to that Vision for Wellington debate when they were talking about vibe and creativity. Their next discussion is going to be about creativity, and I just hope it's a bit more focused than what I heard today. But, it strikes me as this is something that the Wellington City Council gets criticised for, because they put out podcasts, and they have, Gian Casanata, the journalist, a whole series talking to creative business people, all very, very positive. They actually do this, but, at the same time, they've now got people saying the pipes are rupturing, forget that stuff, what are the nice to have? That's what could come out of a meeting like this. If people are saying the nice to haves, we can't have them, let's identify them, Begonia House, I think you're talking about that later. That's what could have come out of this. Like, what are the most important things? Do we have a consensus on what people to consider is the most important? And then we can go forward and, form a plan of action to give people what they want. But it just didn't get close to that, this meeting tonight.
Just under 5 minutes left, Cole. What should we talk about next? Should we talk about your scoop?
Which one's that?
Harvey Norman.
Oh, it wasn't my scoop. No. This was Shane Curry.
I apologise.
No,
sorry.
The Media Insider, NZ. But this is interesting because it was an interesting story. He's the media guy at the Herald, media columnist and former editor, of course. He seems to really enjoy that role. But he had a story that said one of Australia's most popular appliance delivery retailers has moved into New Zealand, aiming to disrupt the $2.3 billion domestic appliance market. It's called Appliances Online, starting up in 5 centres. Hopes to expand across the country. And so I was thinking, that's a business story, nothing much to do with the media, but it struck me like, oh goodness, like that will put the willies up some in the media, particularly the newspapers, because if that undercuts Harvey Norman, Harvey Norman is, I think, by far, certainly by column inch, is the biggest advertiser. How many times you pick up a paper and the whole wraparound is there. So I just wonder whether that is actually what piqued Shane's interest. It's a legitimate business story for sure that this company has started up, but I wonder if there is actually another difficulty the media faces if someone starts chipping away at Harvey Norman and their lavish and fulsome advertising in newspapers. Then that would be another thing to worry them in 2025.
Yeah, indeed, that's interesting. All right, should we finish by talking a bit about this tourism campaign? Much ink has been spilled over this. Many reckons have been uttered. What are yours, Colin?
Yeah, I have a feeling about that. I think everyone's a critic, aren't they, with these slogans and simple messages. And again, at this Wellington thing, they're harking back to the days of absolutely positively Wellington, which I was a young person when that came up and I found it a bit cringe. But Other people loved it, and it certainly stood the test of time. They used it for years and years and years on the promotions, and it kind of worked. So I thought it was a bit harsh. I thought the everyone must go thing is okay, and people said it was a bit like a Briscoe sale or, something like that. But then, of course, the problem is, everyone must go is also a reflection of what's actually happening in New Zealand, because people are picking up and thinking they have to leave the country and make make the opposite.
It's open to interpretation, I suppose.
But then I went back and had a look at. So this is not a new challenge, right? Attracting Australians to New Zealand. And if you think that slogan is a bit cringe, have a look at NZ On Screen's collection. There's about 7 or 8 tourism videos from the 60s through to about 1980. Got time for a quick bit of audio?
Oh, by all means.
Okay, this one is Holiday for Susan. This is a 22-year-old visitor who comes over by plane from Australia to have a holiday. Is practically stalked during the video by a local guy called, I think, David. And when she leaves the country and flies off, this is how it ends.
Perhaps he won't come. Oh, yes, he will. But you never know with men. If that's what Susan's thinking, she's doing a fine feminine job of not showing it. And the waiting is not in vain. A chance photograph, an accidental meeting, an exchange of letters, happy days together. These sometimes are the things that lead to a proposal.
Whoa, yeah. I mean, so just come to New Zealand, get stalked, and fly away before someone tries to marry. It's quite odd. And then there's a 1969 one with an absolutely flat-out jazz wah-wah pedal soundtrack. It's really good, and some quite trippy visuals. It's quite something. And in that one, I think they make the claim that there's more diversity in Christchurch and landscape and so on than in all the millions of acres of Australia.
Right.
So it's quite a kind of insult to push towards people if you're trying to bring them across the ditch and tell them everyone must go and come to New Zealand.
It's still pretty hard to beat Dunedin. It's all right here.
Yeah, true. Actually, in that little clip there about Susan, the voice there was apparently, according to the credits, Selwyn Toogood. I wouldn't have picked that.
No, really? Is that right?
A bit higher register. I suppose he was younger then, 1962.
Colin Peacock, always nice to chat. Thank you.
Thanks. I'll see you in a couple of weeks.